For those who might not be aware, Poco was a sub-brand of Xiaomi, the absolutely huge smartphone manufacturer, and in 2020 became independent. Today we're looking at one of their latest offerings, and it's the X7 Pro, a smartphone that really does seem to tick a lot of boxes and arguably might be one of the best value smartphones out there on the market. Now at the time of filming and in the UK it can be found for just £289. That'll give you 8GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage. If however you've got a little bit of extra money, you might want to go for the 12GB RAM variant with 512GB of internal storage, and that will set you back £329. Now in this review you can see if it's actually worth its price tag and of course how it performs across the board. Now to kick things off, I would just like to point out that within the box you'll find the smartphone with a pre-applied screen protector, a grey silicon rubbery case, a USB Type-C to Type-A cable, which is actually pretty long, and then a 90-watt charger. Now this was actually the EU model, but depending on the region that you're in, you might not also find a charger, so just something I thought I should highlight. Now in terms of the design of the smartphone, I absolutely love it. It's available in a black, a green or a black and yellow finish, with a plastic or an eco leather back to it. Now there is also a special edition Iron Man model which can also be found in certain markets but is going to be a lot more expensive. Now I actually do love the black and yellow finish because it really does stand out in comparison to its competitors, and with the eco leather it also adds a nice sort of texture, making it good to hold. Speaking of which, over here it has got a weight of 195 to 198 grams and has got a thickness of 8.29mm, therefore actually making it very easy to grip. It is also IP68 protected, therefore meaning that you can submerge it, and it even has got dust resistance. Now the screen is made of Corning's Gorilla Glass 7i, therefore giving it some scratch resistance. And as I did mention, there was a pre-applied screen protector on my model. On that note, underneath the screen there's an optical fingerprint sensor. I did find it a little bit low in terms of its placement, but it's actually really rapid when it comes to utilizing it. Now you can pair this up with the AI Face Unlock, which actually does work a treat. Although it's worth noting over here that the Face Unlock won't be as secure as some more advanced flagship smartphones out there, and therefore you might want to reside on just using the fingerprint sensor or a traditional PIN or password. Speaking about its display, you have got a 6.67-inch 120Hz AMOLED display, which runs a resolution of 1220 by 2712 and an aspect ratio of 20:9. It supports HDR10+ and Dolby Vision. And when it came to looking at the screen itself, it really does pop in terms of the overall colors. There is a little bit of extra reflection when it comes to the overall coating of the display, but nonetheless over here I have no complaints. Furthermore, it does actually get pretty bright. In the maximum mode with sunlight mode enabled, I recorded up to 860 nits, while in the maximum mode with the sunlight mode disabled, it went down to 507 nits. In the automatic brightness modes, I noticed a peak of 774 nits, although it did usually hover at roughly 426 nits. This effectively means that this phone is actually perfectly viewable in a very bright sunlit condition, and I don't think you'll have any problems in this department. It does also get all the way down to 1.8 nits, which means that it is therefore very dim and can be used in a very dark environment. Here it also has got 1920Hz PWM dimming, and therefore means that it will give you lower eye strain and will be more usable for those people who are a little bit more sensitive. Now while its display is actually pretty impressive, what really stands out more than anything is its overall camera configuration. At the rear you've got a 50MP f1.5 wide lens with OIS and utilizing Sony's IMX882 sensor. You've also got an 8MP ultra-wide f2.2, which does a decent job, however will look quite softened in comparison to the main lens, and therefore you might want to use it sparingly, but I do appreciate its inclusion because it can be handy in certain scenarios. In terms of the main 50MP lens, I do think it does an absolutely stupendously good job. While the overall shots might look a little bit warmer in comparison to some of its key competitors, I do think it really does perform well, especially in normal lighting conditions. The overall color tones seem to pop, and the image doesn't look overly saturated or indeed overly sharpened, and therefore in comparison to cheaper alternatives, it is a far better pick. Now it's worth mentioning over here that you have got up to 10 times digital zoom. It's actually quite intuitive to use it as well. And here you might not want to rely on zooming in too much to your subject because it will actually blur it quite a bit. Nonetheless, it is still decent to have, and if you're going to be using at 1 to 2 times zoom, I think you'll find that the overall camera performance is going to be really phenomenal. Now with that said, it does actually falter when it comes to low light photography, and that's namely because there was a bit of an odd lens flare or reflection that was occurring when it comes to the rear camera lens. See here, hopefully you'll be able to see that there is almost 2 headlights appearing on your screen, which shouldn't be the case. And it certainly wasn't the case when I was comparing and contrasting it with other smartphones out there, be it more expensive or indeed cheaper alternatives. Nonetheless, if you do get your head around it and enable night mode, and you have, let's say, 1 time zoom, I think you'll find that the results are actually pretty impressive. That f1.5 lens really does come in clutch. Now with that said, if you were to disable night mode or indeed zoom in, you will find that the overall low light photography performance is affected, and therefore the amount of light that's drawn in, or indeed the amount of noise that you will be able to get, is actually quite severe. Now it is also worth mentioning that these sorts of comments are also said for the selfie camera, where you've got a 20 megapixel f2.2 wide lens. Yes, indeed, over here in low light photography, it doesn't exactly do its best, and it might look a little bit blurry if you don't have your hand super steady. Now in normal lighting conditions, however, I've got no complaints. It draws in a good amount of light, and it very much looks accurate in terms of the overall skin tones and in terms of the overall sharpness. However, the only caveat is that with portrait mode enabled, I did find that it did overly sharpen the image, and therefore my face looked a little bit artificial. And yes, all the beauty modes and things like that were disabled. With that said, it does do a decent job when it comes to blurring the background, so it's just something that you might want to experiment with. Now moving on, we get onto its recording capabilities, and at the back you can shoot 4K 60, and it's utilizing OIS and EIS with the main camera lens. It's actually pretty impressive in terms of reducing the overall camera shake, although you will be able to notice that EIS is constantly kicking in and therefore sometimes seems to be a little bit jittery. You've also got 6x digital zoom available, although yet again, very much like when it comes to still photography, I wouldn't rely on it too much because it does blur up the image quite a bit. Now in terms of its capabilities, you can shoot 4K at 24 or 30 FPS. At 1080p, you can shoot 30, 60, 120, 240 and 960 FPS, while at 720p, you can shoot 30, 120, 240 and 960 FPS. The higher frame rates are available in the slow-mo mode, which you'll have to select separately from the video mode. Now it is yet again worth pointing out that the lenses really do struggle when it comes to low light photography. It's not too poor, and in comparison to some of its nearest competitors, it actually does go toe to toe. Of course, comparing it with more expensive alternatives, it doesn't actually stand a chance. Now the front camera is disappointingly limited to 1080p or 720p at 30 FPS. It would have been great to see it included at up to 60 FPS. It yet again struggles in low light photography conditions, but in normal lighting conditions, it actually does a pretty good job. Also doing a pretty good job in terms of giving me a steady image even while running. Now to conclude the camera section, I would just like to have a quick word about the camera app itself, which does look strikingly similar to the Google Chrome icon. But nonetheless itself, when it comes to using the app, it's actually very intuitively laid out and also super responsive. I didn't notice any sort of shutter lag, and furthermore when I was able to hold down the shutter, it also automatically record a video. So it's good sort of integration by the manufacturer. It also doesn't feel too overwhelming, with, let's say, the zoom options being quite intuitive to use by a simple slider function. Now the reason the camera app feels pretty snappy is because you've got a 4nm MediaTek Dimensity 8400 Ultra chipset, and that gives you an octa-core CPU with a Mali G720 GPU. You've also got LPDDR5X RAM, which ranges from 8 to 12 gigabytes. The model I was sent had 12 gigabytes of RAM. You've also got UFS 4.0, which means that it adds to the overall efficiency when it comes to transferring files and also the overall speed of how the phone operates. You've also got Liquid Cooled Technology 4.0 with Poco 3D Ice Loop system, at least according to the manufacturer's specs. This effectively means that the smartphone shouldn't run hot, and from my tests I didn't notice any sort of heat dissipation from the phone itself. It felt really cool and really nice to handle. Now when it comes to the overall benchmarks, it scored 1,535 in the single core and 6,077 in the multi-core score on Geekbench 6, which is actually very impressive given the overall price tag. In GFX Bench, it scored between 23 and 303 FPS. Yes, it really does come close to the flagship tier phones out there on the market. And the Poco X7 Pro in this respect is an absolute powerhouse. Both when it comes to your overall multitasking, I had no issues whatsoever, and no lag when it came to switching between apps or indeed performing more complex operations. And furthermore, given the fact that you have also got a good chipset in there, when it comes to gaming, well, it's a really good pairing as well. Here I do feel that the Poco will actually be very suitable for a lot of individuals, and it just really feels quite powerful, specifically given the overall price point of the phone. Now what's not as nice, however, is the fact that you've got quite a lot of bloatware that's pre-installed with the smartphone. Of course, this is very easy to get rid of, but just worth pointing out when you first turn on the smartphone, don't be alarmed that you've got quite a lot of apps that you never installed or never intend to use in the first place. Now here, the smartphone, at least at the time of filming, is running on Android 15, and you've also got Xiaomi's HyperOS 2, which is actually pretty fluid and gives you plenty of customization options, which are certainly appreciated. You've also got a good use of artificial intelligence that's built in, with the likes of AI erase, image expansion, interpreter, notes, and recorder, all of them being useful inclusions. Of course, you don't have to use them if you don't want. You've also got Google Gemini, which is also baked into the smartphone, which is no surprise because it's very much the case with a lot of modern Android smartphones, but here, yet again, if you don't want to use Gemini, well, you don't have to use it altogether. Now, while that's all very well and good, what about when it comes to the all-important battery life? Well, here you've got a 6,000 milliamp battery, and from my own controlled benchmarks, I netted a very respectable 21 hours and 6 minutes. This will definitely suffice for light to medium usage for almost 2 days, or of course, if you're a heavy user, then expect roughly 1 day of solid usage. And this means that in terms of its overall price and in terms of its competitors, it actually does fare very well. Furthermore, it supports 90 watts of charging, and therefore means that you can go from 0 to 100% in roughly 42 minutes, making it actually pretty handy if you just want to quickly get some extra juice. Now, it's worth noting that the phone does not support wireless charging, no reverse charging capabilities, but that doesn't really bother me in the slightest, given the overall price point that Poco is actually asking for. Now, moving on from its overall battery life, let's talk about some of the other features. And here you've got dual SIM capabilities, and yes, you can run 2 5G SIMs back to back, or a 5G and a 4G SIM, therefore giving it good sort of versatility. Although it's worth pointing out over here, you've got no micro SD expansion slot, which doesn't really bother me because the base storage is 256GB and goes up to 512GB, which is something I thought I should highlight. Equally over here, you've got no 3.5mm jack. But what you do have is audio that can be routed out via the USB Type-C port, or indeed via the dual speakers, which also have got Dolby Atmos support. It's actually pretty impressive, and as someone who's reviewed over 800 audio-related devices, I'll say that the overall audio reproduction of the Poco X7 Pro is actually pretty good. Sure enough, it's not going to compete with more expensive alternatives, but you've still got a pretty rich sound and one that's quite engaging. And here this is because of the Dolby Atmos sound that you can select via the settings, and also the multi-band EQ, which allows you to customize it to your own heart's content. Now elsewhere, it is worth mentioning that you've got dual band Wi-Fi, and in certain markets you've got up to Wi-Fi 6. Equally over here, you'll find certain models with Bluetooth version 5.4 or 6.0. Here you've also got good support of Bluetooth codecs, including higher quality ones such as aptX HD and LDAC, the latter being actually very impressive, and therefore meaning that you'll get good quality audio playback over Bluetooth. Now you've also got an IR blaster and also good sort of haptic feedback. See, while I was doing my test, I felt that the overall haptics didn't feel springy or cheap, but felt actually pretty accurate. Again, it's not going to compete with more flagship offerings out there, but in the grander scheme of things, I think a lot of people will actually be impressed while using the Poco X7 Pro. So with all that in mind, can I see myself recommending the Poco X7 Pro? Well, given the overall price tag of £289 to £329 in the UK and at the time of filming, I think it's an absolute bargain. So here you're getting fantastic battery life, a chipset that performs very well and will be more than sufficient for your day-to-day usage and gaming needs. You've then got a vivid and fluid 120Hz display. You've got a nice set of cameras, which will actually perform pretty well in normal lighting conditions. Then you've also got software with plenty of AI integration, and while it does have a little bit of bloatware, that's easy to get rid of. And you've also got a good set of features, which will also complement the smartphone. And just to add the cherry on top, it actually looks very good in terms of its overall aesthetics. Given all of this, it's actually very easy to recommend the Poco X7 Pro, and as such it gets my Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below, and how you feel it compares with some of its key competitors. Now if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.